All right, welcome back to another Johnny United stream. We're doing audiobook production. And so what we're going to do today is a story that's the third part of a trilogy called the Marysvale Trilogy on Amazon, written by Jared Southwick. If you like to read books, you can look right now. It's up. And if you want to check out the first two, audiobooks are both on Audible. Again, the book is called Marysvale. The second one is called Alyth, Alyth. And the third one will be narrated by yours truly. So we're going to read you a couple chapters tonight. Just to give you guys a little context, I want to play the audio from the prologue for you guys. All right? That way you guys can kind of know what's going on. The child hesitated only for a moment before turning and sprinting away. Behind him, the man looked on until the boy had disappeared from view. From the darkness of the woods, a hulking beast slinked back toward the cloaked figure. You already know what he can do, don't you? While tapping a finger to his temple, the monster growled in a deep, guttural voice. Felt him here. Who would have believed it? Marveled the man. To find two of you, so different, yet the same. Pity we don't have time to train him. The monster snarled. Very well, said the man. Now is our time to act. Follow him. Find out where he lives, and you will find who you seek. Kill them all. All right, so that was the prologue, taking place in John's childhood. Definitely a really fun read, and we'll pick up in chapter 1, just outside of a quaint town that's just been burned down called Alyth, where our main characters were residing at the time. Originally, they're from Marysvale, and they have a variety of accents, so we'll see how good I do with the first read of this chapter. Might have to go back quite a few times to make sure I'm using the right accents for the right characters and the right voices. So let's see. This may take me a while. Here we go. Chapter 1. Reunion. See, I didn't rest enough. Let's try that again. Chapter 1. Reunion. A gigantic plume of black smoke choked the sky, casting the early dawn into gloomy darkness. Like unwanted interlopers, a few lazy snowflakes danced among the heavy rain of gray ash. Scattered in groups across the vast fields of Alyth, mourning villagers huddled in stunned disbelief as they watched ravenous flames devour their dying town. The skeletal remains of their homes still stood as hollow shadows of their vibrant and happy dreams. Many villagers embraced one another as tears flowed freely. Others sat like silent statues on the ground. The grim job of burying the dead had begun, and family members wept over their bodies of their fallen loved ones. Hey, KO City Helper, how are you, buddy? We're just recording a new book called Anam. Give me a moment here. Hope you're enjoying the night, and feel free to listen as you fall asleep. The grim job of burying the dead had begun. The family members wept over the bodies of their fallen loved ones. A gathering of villagers had formed around the 12 newcomers of Sire. A gathering of villagers had formed around the 12 newcomers from Sire. The strangers stood in some surprise as they watched one of their own embrace a lady they had never seen before. With his head buried in her hair, James Shepherd, the blacksmith, enveloped the slender body. Wrapping her arms around his broad neck, the lady held him tightly. Neither one dared to let go, afraid the sweet vision would end and the other would disappear. After a long while, Sarah finally pulled away. Placing both hands on James' red-bearded face, she lifted it and looked into his eyes. Tears streaked down both cheeks. "Oh, my love," she exclaimed joyfully. Seeing him for the first time, Angus gasped. "Jimmy?" James turned at the sound of his name and saw an old man. His face was black with soot, his hair was singed, and he was missing an eyebrow. "My son!" Instantly, a quiver formed on the old man's lower lip. His eyes moistened as tears welled into little pools and broke free, streaming down his dirty face. Dropping his cane, Angus took one faltering step toward him and then another. At first, James appeared confused. Then, all at once, recognition dawned, and his expression turned to joy. "Father!" he cried in wonder. James ran to Angus and caught the old man up in a giant bear hug. I'm glad it's perfect for you, Cable City Helper. What did you say? I should narrate what now? Christmas story or something? Yeah, I don't really do the Christmas thing, but I appreciate it. I'm not really a ho 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 kind of guy, you know what I mean? All right. James ran to Angus and caught the old man up in a giant... I keep misreading words. James ran to Angus and caught the old man up into a giant bear hug. In a quavering voice, Angus said, "I pray my eyes do not deceive me, for it would be a cruel trick. I believed you dead, my boy." "As did I believe of you." They embraced for a long moment before Angus released him. "Where have you been? What kept ye away?" James hesitated, still clearly overwhelmed. Walking to his side, Sarah slipped her hand into his and squeezed it reassuringly. James cleared his throat. I thought you and Sarah were both dead." "Why would you think that?" asked Sarah. "I was told the Brian had killed you." "And what foul being told ye such a lie?" spat Angus. "Why, Jex told me." "Jex!" That's too much. I clipped it. All right. Take care, KO City Elber. Your voice is very relaxing in the most respectful way possible, and a nice way to relax after a gosh. That's the idea. You know, we're too stressed out. Hold on, I gotta go back to the other line because I I read it too loud. "And what foul being told ye such a lie?" spat Angus. "Why, Jex told me." "Jex!" cried Angus in disbelief. "But he was the very body which bore the news of your death." All Jex was selling lies. "But he was the very body which bore the news of your death." Angrily he continued, "To think that I thought of him as a son, and I trusted a member of the I can't read tonight. And a trusted member of the council." All right, take care. I'll see you next time, buddy. Hey, listen, I can't spell anything anymore, any days, so, you know, I can't speak either. All right. Where was I? It is an evil web he weaves," said Sarah. "His treachery bites deep." Waving her arm at the burning village, she added, "This destruction is his doing." Sarah explained the depths of Jax's betrayal to a dumbfounded father and son. Both James and Angus shook their heads incredulously. Their mannerisms removed any doubt of their relationship. Now that they were side by side, it was uncanny how alike they were. Thomas, wielding his way, being human is hard. I agree. Being human is hard. If I write a book, I'm going to write a book, and that's going to be a quote in it. Being human is hard sometimes. Actually, let me write that down. Hold on. I'm dead serious, by the way. I intend to write a book one day. Where's my notes? Come on, notes. Not going to show up on me? There we go. Notes. There we go. Okay. Here we go. Side note, the book would be called Horseshoes and Hand Grenades. Would y'all read it if I wrote a book? Would y'all read the book? I don't. It's not like a near future thing. It's like a 5-year goal. But I'm like writing chapters out now. Like I'm starting it. Hit me up in 5 to 10 years, and I got you. I mean, hopefully we stay in touch throughout. I like to keep my friendships, throughout years. I don't want it to be 5, 10 years before I talk to somebody. Side note, Zales, what is that icon next to your name? It says 2018. Is that how long you've been on Twitch? Since 2018? I need some water. There's a lot of different voices in these characters, so I'll explain who each person is after the chapters are done. After chapter is done. What am I talking about now? All right, we're getting to Thomas now. Thomas, wielding his way between Hannah and me, rested a hand upon the back of my shoulder and asked, "Who's Jax?" I winced ever so slightly under his weight, though somewhat masked by the now permanent shaking of my ravaged body. It was enough. If anyone were to pick up on it, it would be Thomas. He removed his hand and, without waiting for the answer to his first question, asked another. "John, what's wrong?" From the tone of his voice, it was clear that he knew very well what was wrong, having suffered it on many occasions by the hand of his own brutal father. This question, while not loud enough to draw everyone's attention, nevertheless drew Sarah's. She released James' hand, turned to me, and waited for my reply. "Nothing that you haven't been through before," I said, trying to manage a smile. It was a pathetic attempt. You played Overwatch and League games. Blizzard's virtual event. Dope. Yo, Popcorn, GG's from earlier, buddy. How you doing? We're doing bedtime stories right now, bro. It's low-key like a 2-part thing. I'm recording a chapter in a book, and you guys are enjoying me attempt to do, 17 different characters or something, however many there are in this book. But I keep forgetting where I am. So enjoy story time, Popcorn. Yo, no way. Popcorn's been following for nearly a year. That is crazy. Popcorn, I didn't even realize I even streamed KO City that long. Can you believe that? When did I start streaming KO City? I started streaming KO City after I got proficient on PC. That's wild. It's been a long time. Zales, you've been following me for almost 6 months? Wow, our 6-month anniversary will be coming up soon. Sweet. That's crazy. Like, I feel like with Knockout City, everything's happened even though it's been over a year I've been part of the community, I feel like it's all still new. Maybe because I don't stream enough. Maybe I should stream more often, and then like things would make more sense. But it just doesn't seem like that much. Maybe because for a while I was only streaming like once or twice a week, and then it stopped to like twice a month, and it stopped to like once a month. So it's been only a handful of streams. I think that's what it is. Let me see here. Where was I? Okay. It was a pathetic attempt to reassure them that I was fine. But in truth, I was not fine. The vigilance in using my gifts, the wet and cold, hunger, fatigue, beatings, and battles had all taken their toll. Even as I stood, I felt my muscles threatening to give way and refuse their support. "What, pray tell, does that mean?" probed Sarah. "It means," said Jane, "that he has been whipped quite savagely." Sarah's face turned hard and menacing. It matched the edge in Angus' voice when he asked, "What wicked scoundrel would dare to do such a thing?" "This one," grunted Sabin, stepping forward. Let's add a little grunt in there, yeah? "This one," grunted Sabin, stepping forward. Is that better? Is that more of a grunt? Yeah. Yeah, that was a little bit more of a grunt. Just a little bit, because he's in pain too. Sabin's got his ribs broken in the previous book, and it's just all within the same night. All right. We all turned to look at him. "But why?" asked Angus. "Because I was a fool. I believed John to be evil, and you all under his spell. I was wrong. I was wrong." Yeah, this is where the acting comes in, guys. This is the acting part of voice acting. Welcome to the show. "Is that all ye have to say for yourself?" No, that's not the accent for Angus at all. "Is that all ye have to say? Is that all ye have to say?" How am I going to say that? "Is that all you have to say for yourself? Is that all you have to say for yourself?" How is Scottish? Is that all you have to say for Yeah, I'm losing that accent really fast. "Is that all you have to say for yourself?" bellowed a red-faced Angus. He trembled with anger. "Good heavens! Is nobody loyal? How are we supposed to fight our enemies when we have to worry about our friends?" Sabin stood and stoically bore the abuse without complaint as Angus continued to rail against him. "Were they going to try you for witchcraft?" whispered Thomas in my ear. I nodded. His face flushed with anger. "Men who accuse innocent people like that should be the ones to burn." Thomas?" "Yes?" "Perhaps there's something you should know. I'm afraid it may change how you think of me." Just then, the old man Just then, the old man finished his tirade and turned to me. "Well, laddie, what shall we do with him? What shall we do with him?" I like that one better. "Well, laddie." "Well, laddie, what shall we do with him?" I stopped talking, bewildered. I looked at him, and then at Jane. She shrugged. I turned back to Angus. Why is it up to me? Ye are the body he's offended, Angus reasoned. Sabin took a step forward and cleared his throat. I will agree to whatever punishment is decided. No, that's not it. His voice is more Scottish, too. I will agree. You gotta sound like this broken ribs. I will agree. There we go. I will agree to whatever punishment is decided. If I may be permitted, however, I beg your indulgence just... I beg your... I started recording before I started. I beg your indulgence for just one moment. First, I plead for mercy on behalf of my men and request that they be left unmolested. This act was all my decision and wrongdoing. Whatever they did was under my orders. I deserve the punishment for the entire affair. Secondly, I want you, John, to know that I now see what Angus and Sarah see in you. He swept his arm over the groups of villagers. Whether they know it or not, we all need you now. I will help you in whatever way I can. Sabin nodded and stood erect with his hands held behind his back, waiting for his sentence. I remembered my plan to punch him in his broken ribs, but there was no anger left in me. It had been replaced by exhaustion so complete as to render everything else trivial. I had no desire for any more fighting. Need to hydrate, and in order to do that, I need another bottle of water. I do need some agua. 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 No helado. Agua. I appreciate you. Thank you for taking care of your local streamers. Whenever you stop into a chat, one of the first things you do is hydrate, like Ice Cream Ryan here. Smart man. He knows. Show up in the chat. Relieve your streamer. Let them hydrate. Here we go. Got a little music for you guys. And we'll BRB as I go to pee. I've drank 2 water bottles already so far during stream. This is great. It's healthy. And a glass of wine. Okay, we're back, ladies and gentlemen. With 2 water bottles. Because we don't know how long we're going to be here until this chapter ends. Alrighty. As much as we love 67 Radio, let's bring it back. I had no desire for any more fighting. I think, I stated, that we need all who are willing. If Sabin is on our side, then we are better. Then we are the better for it. Sighing, I looked around. Besides, we have more pressing things to attend to. Well said, laddie, exclaimed Angus. Nevertheless, Sabin, ye are nae getting off so lightly. I deem some punishment is still in order. Still in order. In order. Order? I deem some punishment is still in order. I don't know what the accent is. Still in order. So I'm going around still in order. 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 I deem some punishment is still in order. When the council is formed, I shall offer up something fitting. John is right. There's much to accomplish while the daylight lasts. Now go round up the council, or those who are left. We'll need to take stock of the supplies we have, organize the villagers, and assign chores. While you're out there, recruit help and fish what ye can out of the river. There are also maybe useful things lying at the bottom. See if you can find someone brave enough to dive in and retrieve anything down there. These sentences are so long and weird. There also may be useful things lying at the bottom. See if you can find someone brave enough. Brave enough. See if you can find someone brave enough to dive in and retrieve anything down there. Right when I do the take right, bro. See if you can find someone brave enough. See if you can find someone brave enough to dive in and retrieve anything down there. We need to know what we can salvage. Beginning with you, John, said Sarah. Come with me. I want to examine your wounds and warm you up. You look like Death himself. What about Smoke? I asked. Stop worrying about the horse. I'll take care of Smoke, Thomas said brightly. I miss him, and I'll groom the other horses too. See? You have nothing to worry about. Turning to Thomas, Sarah asked. And your name, young man? It's Thomas. It's Thomas Martin, ma'am, he said, tipping his hat. Tipping his hat. Tipping his hat. He said, tipping his hat. He said, tipping his hat. So nice to meet you, Thomas. Now, John, Thomas will see to Smoke while I see to you. Jane, Hannah, come along. You too, James. I'll need your help. Following in her wake, we walked along the bank to the backside of Aelith, where the items saved from the fire had been tossed. We need a shelter, stated Sarah. I'll take care of that, James replied, and they promptly set off toward their pack horses. Hannah, please help me find our bundles. You were able to get our things out? I asked in amazement. We didn't have much to begin with. However, you don't live in a town like Aelith without planning on the possibility of fire. I had time to wrap up some of the important possessions in blankets and tie them up. I need to read. I'm not reading. I'm just like making up words here. I'm still doing that. I had time to wrap up some of the more important possessions in blankets and tie them up. Items I deemed they may have been kicked into the water. Nope, that's not the words. Items I deemed we would need the most. Let us hope our bundles are still dry. I tossed them over the river. Sarah shrugged. Still, they may have been kicked into the water during the fighting. Hannah moved to Boy, getting tired. Hannah moved off to search through the scattered items from the town. Jane, will you please procure some dry clothing for John? I had meant to put a change in for him, but didn't have time. Where shall I look? Sarah stared out over the fields littered with bodies of the Brian and, to a lesser extent, the villagers that had yet to be buried. Jane followed her gaze. Comprehension dawned, and she simply replied, Oh. You can't, I argued. It will be desecrating the fallen. I don't believe they will mind. We will not leave them disrespected. But seeing the horror still haunting my face, Sarah suggested, Perhaps you'll find something amongst the supplies, Jane. What about the villagers? I protested. Many of them are Also, any of them are wet also. You're wet too.
Angus will see to them. You just need to worry about yourself now. You are the most important person here.
I don't agree with that.
Yes, you are. Now stop arguing with me. Your trembling comes Your trembling comes from more than just the cold. We need to find a suitable place to set up camp so you can rest.
Sarah and I walked around the village until we found a spot closer to the gate, located away from the supplies and the dead. James trotted up on his mount, leading another 3 horses laden with provisions. A man from Sire, whom I recognized as Eric Johnson, accompanied him. They both dismounted and quickly went to work unloading the first of the pack animals. I moved to help, but Sarah thought otherwise.
Sit down, John, before you fall down, she said sternly.
I didn't argue. The men carried over a white tarpaulin and unrolled it. In a few minutes, they had raised a tent. Ropes and stakes secured the corners. The opening faced the blazing town. James carried in an animal skin that looked like it had once been a bear. He spread it across the cold ground. Eric went to work, starting a small fire just outside the opening of the tent. Soon, Jane returned with Hannah, each carrying a bundle. Sometimes I find I make up words. Jane also brought dry clothes draped over her arm. Sarah took the garments from Jane and handed them to me.
Go inside and put these on, but leave your shirt off and wait for me.
While holding my newly acquired raiment, I watched her lift the first of the bundles, untie the rope, and unroll the blanket, revealing the contents. It contained clothing for the women. Sarah turned to me and chided.
Well, what are you waiting for? Go inside and change.
I ducked inside the tent and closed the flaps, but didn't tie them off. From the loose opening, a sliver of light illuminated my surroundings. While making the change, I listened to their conversation.
Ah, good. Here they are. What are those pouches for? Asked Hannah. They contain various herbs and plants that I use for medicines. I had to pester Angus incessantly to obtain them for me. From how difficult they were to find in the first place, I dare say it would be impossible now. There are some I wish I had, especially at this time, but they were not to be found. But they were not to be found.
Okay.
Hannah, here are your clothes.
That sounded weird.
Hannah, here are your clothes. Jane, will you unroll that other bundle? There should be a small pot inside. Very good. Now, will you please fill it with water and put it on the fire to heat? Will you please fill it with water and put it on the fire to heat? I have clothes for you as well, my dear. I know you aren't wet, but they're here if you choose. I believe I will. And then I shall wash our laundry in the river.
I don't like that.
I believe I will. And then I shall wash our laundry in the river, said Jane.
All fell silent for a moment, leaving only the sound of things being opened and organized. After I finished changing, I folded my wet garments and set them aside. It felt good to be dry. While I still shivered, it wasn't as violent as before. Reaching up, I flipped one of the tent flaps open and peered out. The bonfire that was Aleph still awed me. It was hot enough to warm the whole of its homeless residents. Sarah was on her knees, rummaging through the bundles. She pulled out dried food, washcloths, a large knife, and a small wooden bowl. These items she set aside. Then she went to work inspecting the contents of several small leather pouches, which I assumed contained the herbs and plants previously mentioned. I flipped the other tent flap open and caught sight of Hannah fidgeting with a makeshift sling that cradled her wounded arm.
"Stop messing with it," instructed Sarah. "I wish you wouldn't make me wear this. I look ridiculous. My arm was good enough to shoot with." "That was out of necessity. You need to let it heal completely."
Jane walked back from the river, carrying a small pot filled with water. Using a stick, she moved the logs, made a flat space, and placed it on the fire. A few feet away, James and Eric were unloading the other pack animals. Sarah took one of the blankets that held the items. Sarah took one of the blankets that held the items, stood and passed it through the tent flaps. Boy, I'm having a hard time reading today.
"Wrap yourself up in this while we wait for the water to heat. You may as well warm yourself by the fire. In the meantime, girls, you can change inside the tent."
I took the blanket, draped it gingerly over my back. And stepped outside. Stooping, Sarah picked up a cloth and the wooden bowl. She dipped the bowl into the pot of water and drew some out. Handing them to Jane, she said,
"As we've already bathed, more or less, during our swim, you may appreciate this."
Then pausing, she added,
"I suppose you could wait for the water to warm if you desire."
Jane took it.
"This will be fine. Thank you. Thank you."
Together, Jane and Hannah retreated into the tent and closed the flaps. With his work finished, James joined us by the fire while Eric took the horses to where the other men of Sire were constructing a corral. Sarah looked at James, and he returned her gaze. They exchanged a solemn but tender expression, filled with questions and feelings that only a lifetime apart could convey. She took a deep breath and then let it out.
"What fills your head, James Shepherd? What fills—"
Oh, I'm reading that wrong. Skipping words.
"What thoughts fill your head, James Shepherd?"
He paused for a moment before replying. "Too many to count, but mostly sorrowful ones. Sorrow for the lost time. Sorrow for what it could have been."
"There's also joy," added Sarah, "for what was lost is now found."
He smiled. "There is that."
"Tell me, James, what happened those many years ago when you and the others went for help?"
He broke his gaze and looked off to some unseen place, accessing memories from the recesses of his mind. "I tell you, Sarah, it was uncanny. The brain shouldn't have found us. We were extremely careful. No fires. Only 6 men. No direct route. We minded our tracks. We did everything we could to disguise our trail and our scent. It was thoroughly planned out. Of course, you know all this."
"So did Jex," added Sarah.
James nodded. "Aye. Been thinking about that too." He fell silent. Sarah let the silence hang for a moment and then asked,
"And what have you come up with?"
"I don't fully know. We weren't terribly close before the end, Jex and I. Yet we weren't terribly distant either. Just something between us had cooled. I could never understand it then. We squabbled a wee bit, but nothing that far out of the ordinary. I'm finding his betrayal difficult to accept."
We all are,"
Sarah replied. After a brief pause, she asked,
"How about in retrospect? Knowing what you know now, does anything seem clearer?"
"Aye, I suppose some things are a wee bit clearer. But the way the Brian found us made no sense. And there wasn't just one, but many, too many. 1 or 2 scouts, sure. The 6 of us could have handled that. Perhaps it was even expected, but not a dozen or more. It happened at dusk, when the light was growing dim." Shaking his head at the memory, James continued, "It was over before it began. We came over a ridge, and he spread his arms wide. There they were, already upon us. The horses panicked. We did our best to form up, got our shots off fair enough, but there were just too many, and they were too close. None of us had time to reload our guns." James shrugged. "I don't remember much after that. Not even sure how or why I survived. I either fell and hit my head or a brain bashed it." After a moment's pause, James asked, "Remember Alexander, Sarah?" She nodded.
"I didn't like him much."
One corner of his mouth turned up in a half-smile, perhaps remembering that indeed she hadn't. "I woke up covered in blood and a nasty wound on my scalp, and one across my chest. I found Alexander lying on top of me, still alive but unconscious. He never came around enough for me to ask him anything. I don't know if he somehow fought them off. Doubtful. Perhaps the brain passed us over, taking us for dead. Regardless, I lived through it. I searched for the others. William and Edward were nowhere to be seen. I have no idea if either man survived. I never seen them again. Brandon and Hiram were lying close by. It took me some time to bury them. It took me quite some time to bury them." With our horses gone, I had no way of moving Alexander. I probably should have left him, but I couldn't bring myself to respond to anything I said. No, that's not what I wrote. That's not what's written. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. I sat with him for 3 days. At first, he did wake up a few times, but something wasn't right. He didn't respond to anything I said. He mumbled at times, but he made no sense. It was like he was talking to somebody else, but there was no one there. James took a deep breath and let it out. His shoulders sagged as if under a tremendous burden. On the 3rd day, my fears were realized, and the brain returned. I didn't have much warning, so I climbed a tall tree and hid. And they did what I couldn't bring myself to do. Guess they put Alexander out of his misery, huh? A shudder ran through his body. I like to believe that Alexander saved my life. If the Brian returned and saw fewer bodies than they had left, they might have deduced that one of us had survived and hunted me down. But when they found Alexander still breathing, they assumed he had buried the dead. Of course, I'm not certain, but I think of it that way. It gives his death meaning. Sarah took one of his great hands and cradled it in hers.
I am so sorry you went through that.
He patted her hands with the other one. I'm sorry any of us have.
What happened next? What happened next? What happened next? What happened next?
Asked Hannah. I felt mildly surprised to see her and Jane standing by my side. I hadn't noticed them emerge from the tent. Well, continued James, I stayed up in that tree all night. I stayed up in that tree all night. Where was I? Keep losing my stuff. To be honest, I was scared witless by what I saw them do to poor Alexander. But come morning, I noticed a rider approaching in the distance. He was leading a few of our stray horses. Checks, whispered Sarah. James nodded. He had said he had a bad feeling. Wait, what?
He had said he had a bad feeling,
explained Sarah. James nodded again, agreeing with that sentiment. It was far too early to expect any of you to return.
It was far too early to expect any of you to return, she continued. But he insisted on going after you. He felt sure something had gone wrong. I wanted to come, but he said it was too dangerous to risk any more lives.
Do you think he was going to warn you? No. I see this is why it's challenging.
Do you think he was going to warn you? To try and stop what had happened? Do you think he was going to warn you to try and stop what happened?
Offered Hannah. With a sad expression, James shook his head. Nay, as I said before, some things are clearer. Knowing what I know now, I believe he was surprised to find anyone alive. His joy felt unnatural, not genuine. His sorrow also seemed forced when he bore the terrible news that you had all perished. Addressing Sarah, James continued, Jex told me that you and Father had been killed while scouting a location for a new settlement. I had no reason to doubt him. Upon reflection, everything about our meeting felt off. I presumed he was suffering from shock, the shock of losing so much. Now I know it was all a lie.
Why do you suppose he came after you? Why do you suppose he came after you?
Asked Jane.
I believe, offered Sarah, that he intended to make sure the desired outcome had been secured. But then why didn't he kill you? Jane pressed. But then why didn't he kill you? Jane pressed.
That's a good question, Jane. Let's find out. The surprise of finding me alive may have thrown him off a wee bit. I was also wounded and extremely weak, not having had anything to eat or drink for days. It was as near to death, or I was as near to death. Now I sound Australian, and I don't like that I'm turning Australian. The surprise of finding me alive
may have thrown him off a wee bit. I was also wounded and extremely weak, not having anything to eat or drink for a few days. I was as near to death as ever I was. As I ever was. I was as near. How would a Scottish person say near? Scottish person say near. I was as near to death as I ever was, and that's no lie. Jix told me that he was going to look for some missing men. That he was going to look for the missing men, and that I should wait for him with the horses. He said he would return in an hour and help me get back to Marysvale. From what I know now, my guess is that Jix had no intention of coming back, thinking it likely that I would die shortly on my own, or knowing that the Bream would return and they could easily finish me off. Before he left, Jix gave me his canteen and some food. I took them gratefully, but I was too overcome with my own shock and grief to respond to the terrible news of your deaths. As I let that seep in a wee bit, I decided there was nothing for me back in Marysvale. I planned to wait and tell him that I wouldn't be returning with him, but I had a queer feeling inside me urging me to leave right away. I feared that the Brian would return before Jax could, so I heaved myself onto one of the remaining horses and set out to find him. Oddly, the uneasy feeling perished and intensified. The uneasy feeling persisted and intensified, so, before I got too far away, I turned my horse about and fled the other way. The interesting thing is, I sensed I was being followed. I thought it might have been a brain or just my nerves getting the better of me. Perhaps it was Jake's. For the first little while, I believed I was being tracked. I went to great lengths to hide my trail. I wanted to die, but not by the hand of a brain. I rode long and hard. Hoping that I would succumb to my wounds and join you, sir. But Jax came back wounded, said Sarah, as if he had been in a fight. James shrugged. I don't know about that. I suppose he could have inflicted the wounds himself to make his story more believable. Or Lord Wright punished him for... Or Lord Wright punished him for his failure to find you, suggested Hannah. Perhaps, Sarah agreed. What did you do then, James? I rode nearly all day. Eventually, I came upon a farm and collapsed in the field before I could make it to the house. The farmer was a good man by the name of Grant Stewart, found me. The farmer, a good man by the name of Grant Stewart, found me. He and his kind wife nursed me back to health. I was there for about 4 months before I felt strong enough to move on. After a year of drifting, I decided it was time to head back to Marysvale. However, when I reached Sire, I stopped. I just couldn't face life back there without you, so I stayed in Sire and started over. I had lived there for many years when John and that great horse of his arrived. Addressing me as James, Addressing me, James said, Children can change so much in that time. I wasn't entirely sure it was really you. You gave no inclination that you recognized me or knew anything about Marysvale. I hinted at it a few times, but to no avail. Thomas walked up and then stretched his hands over the fire, warming them.
Thomas walked up then and stretched his hands over the fire, warming them. I didn't say anything because I didn't remember anything of my younger life, I explained. I still don't, really. Just fragments and occasional flashes of memory. Nothing too specific. Most of what I know has come from Sarah and Jane.
What happened to you? Why don't you remember? Asked Thomas.
I was attacked by the king of the Brian and hit my head. I had no recollection of anything, and my father, for whatever reason, never told me about it.
Brian? Are those the dead animals? Brian? Are those the dead animals lying all over? Are they the ones you told us about, Mr. Shepherd?
Aye. We didn't see any of them on our way here. I wonder if they'd all been killed off over the years. I wondered if they'd all been killed off over the years.
Sadly, no, said Sarah. They were most likely all here, attacking Aelith. There's much you and your men should know about them, and Merrick Wright. However, that can wait for nightfall. There's still much work to do before then, and John needs medical attention, food, and rest.
But I can help, I protested. Even though I felt like I couldn't.
No, you cannot, Jane stated emphatically.
Problem is, I'm trying to know who's talking before I even read the statements.
Jane is right, my dear, agreed Sarah. You are in no state to do anything. With little food, little sleep, fighting off the Brian and torture, I believe you have earned a rest. Besides, I have a feeling that there will be plenty for you to do in the coming days.
Reaching down, Sarah retrieved some dried apples and venison and handed them to me.
Now off you go into the tent. Eat while I get a poultice.
What word is that? Do you know this word? Here, chat. You tell me. Have you seen this word?
Tell me, have you seen this word?
Boom. $70,000 goes to the first person that can say that correctly without looking it up. Never seen that word before in my life. How to pronounce. Not in Italian, in English.
Poultice.
That's what it is. If you didn't say it soon enough, you don't get the $70,000. I guess I get it. All right.
Eat while I get a... my knuckles cracked. It made the noise. Eat what...
that's too low for Sarah.
Eat while I get a poultice ready for your back. You too, Jane. You've earned a rest as well.
All right. I glanced at Hannah, expecting some kind of objection. A look of disapproval flashed in her eyes, and for a moment I expected a complaint about impropriety. But she didn't say anything. Clearing his throat, James said, Well, I best find Father and see what he needs doing. Too. My blanket... Well, I best find Father and see what needs doing. With my blanket still wrapped around me, I slipped into the tent to lounge on the bearskin. Jane followed me in and sat with her legs crossed on the corner of the rug. I divided the food between us. Hungrily, we devoured our meal in silence. Through the flap, I watched Sarah pour a small amount of hot water into the bowl. Then she took some herbs, crushed them up, and dropped them in. She stirred it using a stick, alternately adding Why is my mouth popping? Alternately adding plants and water until she had the concoction just right. Together, Sarah and Hannah entered the tent.
"Now let me have a look,"
ordered Sarah.
"Remove the blanket and lie on your stomach."
Hannah sat down next to Jane, and they both turned to watch. I obeyed.
"Oh my,"
gasped Hannah.
"That doesn't look good. Sabin has not heard the end of this."
Sarah and Jane wore expressions that seemed to agree. "I'll be fine," I reassured them. Sarah began spreading the warm paste over my back.
"Now, tell us what happened on your journey."
Jane began with the silent, awkward ride out of Aleph, and her description of how the men turned on us when we were not far from the village. While Sarah attended to my back, I listened to Jane's tale and gazed out at the fire. It crackled and popped near the tent entrance. I could feel the heat radiate through the air. Or perhaps it was the intense heat given off by the still-burning town. My eyes grew heavy, and by the time Jane told of our first camp, I had slipped into a deep, exhausted sleep. And that's chapter 1. Tune in next time, or later today, for more motivational reading and another chapter of Anam. And in the meantime, love, peace, and chicken grease.